fantasize about waking up to a silent, empty house where the lives of 3 women should have been bustling. Their shoes neatly by the door, their cars still in the driveway, their purses and belongings all right where they left them. Yet they're gone, vanished without a trace, not a single cry or sound heard. The Springfield Three, a mother, her daughter, and her friend, all disappeared one night as if swept away by some ghostly hand. Their case would become one of the most haunting and perplexing unsolved mysteries, laced with dead-end trails and eerie silence. Where did they go? And who could have been watching them, lying in wait for that exact moment? Imagine a bright, peaceful summer night in a quiet Missouri neighborhood. Inside a modest home at 1717 East Delmar Street, 3 women, 47-year-old Cheryl Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter Susie Streeter, and Susie's best friend, 18-year-old Stacy McCall, fall asleep after a long day of celebration. Just hours before, Susie and Stacy had been all smiles, proudly walking across the stage at their high school graduation, preparing to take their first steps into adulthood. The future was calling, and life had never looked so bright. But that night, as the neighborhood slept, something dark and incomprehensible was happening behind the closed doors of that house. The next morning, the once bustling home was eerily silent. When friends arrived to meet Susie and Stacy for a day trip, no one answered. The lights were still on, the family dog was anxiously pacing, but the women were nowhere to be found. Inside, things seemed normal at first glance. Their cars were in the driveway, their belongings untouched. But the longer one looked, the more unsettling the scene became. The women's purses lay neatly in a row on the floor, filled with cash, IDs, and makeup, as though they'd just set them down for a moment. Their beds were made, and there were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows, no forced entry. It was as if they'd simply vanished into thin air. For the next several days, the Levitt home became the focus of a frantic investigation. Before we continue this chilling true story, please like and subscribe to this channel to get more stories like this. Also share your views in the comment section below. I will try to reply to as many comments as possible. Thank you. Now let's dive back in. Detectives combed through every corner, but each clue only deepened the mystery. A shattered porch light, a strange phone call with nothing but silence on the other end, small, unsettling details that hinted at something sinister. Friends and family, desperate for answers, moved through the house, unknowingly trampling over possible evidence. By the time detectives had the scene secured, too much had already been disturbed. As the days turned to weeks, the community held its breath, clinging to hope, though no ransom notes or calls came. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was it a kidnapping? A planned attack? Could it be the work of a stranger who had watched and waited for the perfect moment? Or was it someone they knew, someone who had crossed their paths before? The Springfield Three were gone, and as days turned into years, their disappearance would become one of America's most haunting, unsolved mysteries. To this day, no one knows for sure what happened that night. The house remains silent, filled only with whispers of what might have been. And in Springfield, the unanswered question still hangs in the air, casting a long, dark shadow over that summer night so long ago. Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, 3 names forever etched into the psyche of Springfield, Missouri. On the surface, they were simply a mother and 2 young women, moving through life like everyone else in the quiet Midwest. But on the morning of June 7, 1992, they became the center of a terrifying enigma that would haunt their families and captivate a nation. To understand the mystery of their disappearance, we first need to understand who they were, what bound them together, and what secrets they might have unknowingly harbored in those last few hours. Cheryl Elizabeth Levitt, a devoted single mother at 47 years old, was known for her tenacity and resilience. She had lived a life of hard work and sacrifice, but she found joy in it, especially when it came to raising her daughter Susie. Cheryl had a knack for hairdressing, and had spent years perfecting her craft, building a loyal clientele who trusted her with not only their hair but their life stories. Known to be vivacious and fiercely independent, Cheryl was the kind of woman who exuded strength, even through difficult times. She had faced heartbreak and disappointment, particularly in her relationships, but none of it had dimmed her bright spirit or fierce dedication to providing a good life for her daughter. Susie Streeter, Cheryl's only child, was the mirror image of her mother in many ways. At 19, Susie had an independent spirit, a sharp sense of humor, and a rebellious streak that made her both adored and admired by her friends. She was no stranger to the ups and downs of teenage life. Though friendly and easygoing, she'd had her share of heartbreaks and broken friendships. Susie was known for her striking blonde hair, which, like her mother's, was always styled just so. She had a keen sense of style, gravitating towards bright colors, fashionable jeans, and t-shirts emblazoned with the spirit of the 90s. In her senior year of high school, Susie had blossomed into a confident young woman who could stand her ground in any situation. She had dreams of becoming a cosmetologist like her mother and had even started practicing her skills on friends and family. Then there was Stacy McCall, Susie's best friend, who had quickly become part of Cheryl and Susie's little family. Stacy, like Susie, was 18 and had just graduated high school the day before she vanished. Known for her sweet and gentle personality, Stacy was the type of friend everyone wished they had. She had a heart of gold, always ready with a kind word or a comforting smile. Unlike Susie, who had a penchant for rebellious style, Stacy had a softer, more laid-back charm. She had been looking forward to spending her summer before college relaxing, having fun, and creating memories with her friends. Her parents, Janice and Stuart, were especially protective of their youngest daughter, and they couldn't have imagined that a night of celebration would turn into a nightmare. The friendship between Susie and Stacy was genuine and deep, formed in the halls of Kickapoo High School. They had gone through the ups and downs of teenage years together, crushes, heartbreaks, gossip, and dreams for the future. Stacy was the quieter of the two, providing a calming balance to Susie's vivacious personality. Despite their different temperaments, they shared a bond that felt almost sisterly. On the night of their graduation, Susie and Stacy had every reason to celebrate. They were on the cusp of new adventures, filled with hope, plans, and a sense of freedom they'd never felt before. That night, the two friends had decided to bounce from one graduation party to another, savoring each moment as they laughed, danced, and embraced the possibilities awaiting them. Initially, they had planned to stay at another friend's house after the festivities, but in a last-minute decision around 2:15 a.m., they decided instead to head back to Susie's house, where they'd stay the night. Perhaps it was the quiet comfort of the Levitt home that drew them back. After a whirlwind night, there's something soothing about the familiarity of a home like Cheryl's, where Susie had spent countless nights and Stacy was always welcome. But within hours of entering that house, they would become a part of one of the most baffling mysteries in American history. Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a series of haunting clues that only deepened the mystery surrounding them. The Levitt household was a sanctuary of sorts, one filled with laughter, love, and warmth. Cheryl had created a home where Susie's friends were always welcome, where everyone could feel at ease, no matter what was happening outside. Cheryl had worked tirelessly to maintain this sanctuary, making sure Susie had a stable and loving environment. To those who knew her, Cheryl was a loving mother who had overcome her own share of life's challenges, but none could have predicted that her strength would be met with such a chilling and sudden silence. Cheryl's background was not without its mysteries either. She had been a fiercely private woman, one who rarely spoke of her own past relationships. Although she had been married once, that marriage had ended long before Susie was born. Rumors floated about different men from Cheryl's past, none of them serious enough to warrant much attention, or so it seemed. To the police, though, this meant that anyone from Cheryl's past life could potentially hold a clue to the family's disappearance. But it wasn't only Cheryl who held secrets. Susie had, in her last months of high school, started hanging out with a different crowd, one that her mother didn't approve of. It was the usual teenage rebellion, but some of Susie's new friends were rumored to have dabbled in things like petty crime. There were whispers that Susie may have been involved with a few people who weren't the safest company to keep, and this small fact cast a shadow on her disappearance. Could someone from Susie's new social circle have followed her home that night? Could she have known too much, or been caught up in something she didn't fully understand? Meanwhile, Stacy's parents grappled with the idea that their loving, gentle daughter could be caught up in such an unfathomable mystery. Stacy, who was known to be cautious and trustworthy, was hardly the type to get into any kind of trouble. But being with Susie had thrown her into a situation that was far beyond her control. The story of the Springfield Three is not just the story of a disappearance. It's the story of lives intertwined by fate, a mother and daughter whose bond was unbreakable, and a best friend whose only mistake was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Each woman had a different personality, but their lives were inextricably linked by that fateful night. Today they are remembered not only by their families but by everyone who has ever heard their haunting story. They are remembered for the laughter that filled the Levitt home, for the dreams that were never realized, and for the tragedy that lingers in the quiet streets of Springfield. This is a story of lost lives and broken dreams, a story where every question leads to more unanswered ones, and a mystery that refuses to fade from memory. It was the summer of 1992, and in the heart of Springfield, Missouri, the days were long and hot, filled with the buzzing excitement of graduation season. Just hours before they vanished, Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall were celebrating one of the most important milestones of their young lives. With high school behind them, they had dreams and ambitions on the horizon. But what began as a night of joy, laughter, and anticipation would soon plunge into darkness, a darkness that would shroud Springfield in fear for years to come. The festivities kicked off with high spirits on the late hours of June 6, 1992. Graduates from Kickapoo High School filled the town with celebration. Susie and Stacy had planned to attend several parties together, hopping from one to another, reveling in the freedom that came with finishing high school. At each stop, friends laughed, snapped pictures, and made plans for the future, unaware that some of them would never see Susie or Stacy again. At one of the parties, Susie and Stacy decided on a change of plans. Originally, Stacy was supposed to spend the night at a friend's house, but as the evening stretched into the early hours of the morning, the two friends decided it would be easier to stay at Susie's house on East Delmar Street. It seemed like a simple, inconsequential choice at the time, a matter of convenience. No one could have predicted that this last-minute decision would alter their lives forever. The clock had passed 2 a.m. on June 7, 1992, when Susie and Stacy finally left the last party, driving together back to the home Susie shared with her mother, Cheryl Levitt. It was a quiet residential street, lined with houses where families were likely fast asleep, unaware of the looming tragedy. The streetlights cast long shadows over the pavement as the two young women made their way home, unaware that this journey would be their last known movement. The Levitt home was dark and still, suggesting Cheryl was already in bed. Susie and Stacy, likely exhausted from their night out, slipped inside. But from this point, there is nothing but silence. What transpired in the next few hours remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in criminal history. Around 9 a.m. on June 7, 1922, Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, began to worry. She had expected her daughter to call or come home to discuss their plans for a family trip to a water park later that day. But the hours stretched on, and still, there was no word from Stacy. She called Susie's home phone repeatedly, but each time, the phone rang unanswered. As concern grew, Janice decided to drive over to Cheryl Levitt's house. She knocked, but there was no response. The cars were still parked in the driveway, Cheryl's green Toyota Corolla and Susie's Ford Escort, but no one answered the door. Janice could sense something was terribly wrong. She could feel it in her bones, but there was no evidence yet, just an inexplicable silence that left her heart pounding. Janice wasn't alone in her concern. Friends and family of Suji, Cheryl, and Stacy began to arrive at the house. They had expected to find the women still sleeping or perhaps out running errands. But the house was eerily quiet, and each knock went unanswered. When they finally decided to enter the house, they were greeted by an unsettling sight. Inside, the house appeared undisturbed at first glance. Cheryl's bed was neatly made, and all three women's purses were lined up in the living room, untouched. The family dog, a small Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, was anxiously pacing the house, barking and scratching at the walls as if trying to tell the visitors something. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture or broken glass, just an odd, unnatural stillness. As they searched the rooms, a few small but disturbing details began to emerge. Susie's bed showed signs that she'd slept in it, but Stacy's bed remained untouched, suggesting she may not have gone to sleep at all. In the bathroom, a few freshly washed towels were neatly folded, and makeup was scattered across the countertop, as if the women had been in the middle of their morning routine before vanishing. The incongruity of these clues was chilling. It was as if they had been plucked from the house in mid-action, leaving their belongings frozen in time. By now, friends and family were growing desperate. They reached out to the Springfield Police Department, who arrived at the scene to begin an investigation. But already, a critical mistake had been made. Due to the initial search by friends and family, the scene had been unknowingly contaminated. Well-meaning friends had swept through the house, moved belongings, and attempted to tidy up, not realizing they were disturbing potential evidence. This simple but fateful mistake would haunt the investigation for years to come. Police began a meticulous examination of the scene, searching for anything that could hint at the women's whereabouts. They combed through the house, noting every detail from the unlocked front door to the neatly placed purses. But despite their efforts, they found nothing that suggested where the women had gone or why they would have left in such a hurry without their belongings. The news of the disappearance spread quickly through Springfield, sending shockwaves throughout the small community. People couldn't believe that three women could vanish without a trace, leaving behind only a few haunting clues. Neighbors and friends gathered outside the house, whispering theories and offering their support to the worried families. The normally quiet neighborhood was filled with an air of tension and unease, as if everyone was waiting for the nightmare to end. Police began interviewing neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, trying to piece together the events leading up to the disappearance. They discovered that a neighbor had reported seeing a strange green van parked near the Leavitt home around the time the women vanished. The van was reportedly idling with its headlights on, casting an eerie glow over the street. But when police attempted to track down the van, it was nowhere to be found. The van would become a focal point in the investigation, a tantalizing lead that would ultimately prove frustratingly elusive. The investigation got intensified on June 8, 1922. With no sign of the women and no new leads, the police began to explore every possible angle. They searched nearby fields, ponds, and wooded areas, hoping to find any trace of the missing women. Helicopters flew overhead, and divers scoured local waterways. But despite their exhaustive efforts, nothing was found. It was as if the women had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a whisper of their presence. As the days turned into weeks, tips began flooding in from across the country. Some claimed to have seen the women in other states, while others insisted they had been abducted by a dangerous criminal gang. Police followed up on every tip, but each lead ended in frustration. The hope that had buoyed the families and the community began to wane, replaced by a growing sense of dread. In the weeks that followed, a bizarre phone call would inject new life into the investigation. An anonymous caller claimed to know the whereabouts of the Springfield Three and offered cryptic clues about their fate. Police traced the call but were unable to identify the caller or verify their information. The tantalizing hint was ultimately a dead end, adding yet another layer of frustration and mystery to the case. As the investigation stretched into the following year, a new lead surfaced that would haunt investigators for years. Police received a tip linking the disappearance to a man named Robert Cox, a convicted kidnapper and known suspect in other criminal investigations. Cox had been in Springfield at the time of the disappearance and had a history of violence against women. But when questioned, Cox was evasive, offering only vague hints and refusing to provide concrete answers. Police were never able to tie him directly to the case, and Cox was eventually released due to lack of evidence. Today, the case remains as baffling as it was on that fateful morning in 1992. Despite countless hours of investigation, thousands of tips, and years of hard-hack, the Springfield Three have never been found. Each new piece of evidence, each promising lead, only deepens the mystery. It's as if they have slipped through the cracks of reality, leaving behind a haunting legacy that will continue to resonate in the quiet streets of Springfield. As the years passed and the trail grew colder, some began to turn to unconventional sources for answers. Psychics were brought in, one after another, each claiming to have insights into the case. Some claimed the women's bodies were hidden near water, others suggested wooded areas or old farmhouses on the outskirts of town. Families and detectives were divided on these methods. Some saw it as a desperate last resort, while others hoped that any lead, no matter how unusual, might finally bring resolution. One psychic, in particular, described a disturbing vision of the women trapped in a confined space, held against their will. Though this information was vague and unverifiable, it added another layer of mystery, leaving family members with haunting images of what might have happened. These psychic leads, like so many other avenues, ultimately led nowhere. The visions and predictions only added to the fog of confusion surrounding the case, a haze of uncertainty that continues to linger over Springfield. As the investigation continued to stall, local rumors took on a life of their own. Some whispered that the women had been victims of a cult, while others insisted that a high-ranking member of Springfield society had orchestrated the abduction. Conspiracy theories flourished, fueled by the lack of concrete information and the bizarre details surrounding the case. Every strange occurrence, every shadowy figure spotted near the Leavitt home, added to the growing paranoia that had gripped the town. Springfield had become a place of suspicion, where neighbors looked over their shoulders, and trust became a rare commodity. People questioned who could be involved and feared that the person responsible could be walking among them. The disappearance had cast a long shadow, one that would forever change the fabric of the community. Over the years, the police continued to pursue any lead they could find, revisiting old evidence and re-interviewing witnesses in the hope of uncovering something they had missed. Despite their dedication, each potential breakthrough seemed to be thwarted by insurmountable roadblocks. Leads that seemed promising would dry up, and suspects who initially appeared suspicious would be cleared. It was an exhausting cycle of hope and disappointment, with each turn bringing the detectives closer to despair. Evidence from the home was tested and retested as technology advanced, but nothing definitive emerged. Every time investigators thought they had found a new direction, the trail would end in heartbreak. It was as if the case itself were a labyrinth, each lead a false path that only served to deepen the mystery. Throughout the years, the Springfield Police Department continued to receive tips from people who claimed to know what had happened to Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy. Some of these tips were so specific and disturbing that they sent chills down the spines of the officers reading them. However, without concrete proof, these anonymous claims could do little more than add to the lore of the Springfield Three. There was one call in particular that came from a man claiming to know exactly where the women were buried. Yet when police pressed him for details, he clammed up and refused to reveal his identity, leaving investigators grasping at yet another fleeting lead. There was even a claim from someone who suggested that the women had been taken by a secret society as part of some initiation or punishment. Wild theories such as these left the investigators in an unusual bind. They were unable to ignore even the most bizarre leads, given the total absence of solid evidence. But with each outlandish theory and every anonymous whisper, the case grew colder, weighed down by the web of speculation and misinformation. In recent years, the Springfield police have turned to advancements in forensic science and technology to re-examine the evidence from the original investigation. DNA analysis, which was limited in the 1990s, has now become a standard tool in criminal cases. Cold case units have examined the DNA profiles of people linked to the case in any way, hoping for a breakthrough. But with every DNA test that comes back inconclusive, hope dims just a little more. The authorities have also explored the possibility of using geographic profiling and data analysis to track any patterns that might have been overlooked. Yet, even with these modern tools, the mystery remains. Every piece of evidence that could have provided answers has only served to deepen the darkness surrounding the disappearance. Today, the Springfield Three case stands as one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in American history. The investigation has left behind a legacy of unanswered questions and broken lives. For the families of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, every day is a reminder of the nightmare that began one June morning in 1992. The house on East Delmar Street, where laughter and life once filled the walls, remains haunted by the absence of three women who should have been safe within its walls. As investigators continue to chase the truth, one fact remains clear. Somewhere, someone knows what happened that night. It could be a neighbor, a passerby, or a hidden suspect. It's a truth that lingers just out of reach, taunting those who seek answers. The haunting possibility remains that the mystery of the Springfield Three may never be solved, that it might become another story whispered in the dark, another legend of vanished lives. As days turned into months, theories about the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall swirled within the small, tight-knit community of Springfield, Missouri. Rumors and suspicions hung over the town like a dark cloud, with every strange encounter, every whispered conversation seeming to bring a new lead or a new suspect. Some theories pointed to familiar faces, while others ventured into the realm of organized crime, cults, and the possibility of serial killers lurking in the shadows. But with every theory that emerged, one unsettling truth became clearer. There were countless ways this tragedy could have unfolded, and the perpetrator could have been anyone. As investigators dug deeper, some began to theorize that this was no random crime, but a meticulously planned abduction, orchestrated with precision and carried out under the cover of night. Perhaps someone had been watching the Levitt home, tracking Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy's movements, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The house itself provided some evidence that fed this theory. Nothing was out of place. No valuables were stolen, and there was no sign of forced entry. It was as if the perpetrator had been able to walk right in, either because he was known to the women or because he had a way to make himself invisible. Some investigators speculated that whoever was responsible had intentionally targeted these three women, waiting until they were all in one place to make their move. But the question remained, why them? Why Cheryl, a hardworking single mother, and two young women just beginning their adult lives? What could they have done or known to make them the focus of such a chillingly calculated crime? One theory that emerged was the possibility of organized crime involvement, particularly surrounding illegal activities that could have involved the Levitt home, either directly or indirectly. Some locals hinted that certain crime rings had become more active in Springfield during the early 1990s, and whispers of drugs and illegal trafficking occasionally floated to the surface of discussions around the case. Investigators considered the possibility that Cheryl Levitt might have inadvertently stumbled upon something she shouldn't have, something that placed her and those close to her in mortal danger. However, this theory had no hard evidence to support it. There was no proof that Cheryl had been involved in anything illegal, nor was there any indication that she had been in debt or embroiled in a dangerous situation. But the possibility of a crime syndicate powerful enough to eliminate three women and cover its tracks lingered in the minds of some investigators. Such an organization, if it existed, would likely be capable of carrying out a meticulous abduction and keeping it hidden for decades. Another theory that began to take root in the community was the possibility of cult involvement. Springfield had its share of urban legends and tales of secretive gatherings, and rituals were often whispered about in hushed tones. Rumors circulated that a cult had targeted the Levitt home, possibly in connection with something Cheryl or the young women knew or witnessed. There were those who believed that a cult might have carried out the abduction as part of an initiation or ritual, a grim possibility that only deepened the mystery surrounding the case. This theory gained traction among some residents who saw the eerie silence of the Levitt home and the absence of any obvious motive as signs that something supernatural or cult-related was at play. Despite its sensational allure, investigators found no concrete evidence of cult activity, dismissing it as mere speculation. But the rumor persisted, casting a long shadow over the case and adding an unsettling layer to the already haunting story. One of the most disturbing theories revolved around the idea of a lone predator, a stranger who had become fixated on Cheryl, Susie, or Stacy and had meticulously planned their abduction. Witnesses reported seeing a suspicious figure lurking in the area in the days leading up to the disappearance, though no clear description of the person ever emerged. Could it have been a stalker who had been silently watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Investigators probed this angle, examining records of reported stalkers or suspicious persons in the area. They interviewed neighbors and friends, searching for anyone who might have shown an unusual interest in the three women. But like so many other leads, this theory remained elusive. The shadowy figure, if he existed, had left no trace, no fingerprints, no DNA, not even a hair. It was as if he had slipped into the night just as seamlessly as he had arrived. As years passed and more missing person cases were reported in Missouri and nearby states, a terrifying thought crept into the investigation. What if the Springfield Three were victims of a serial killer? Authorities began to re-examine unsolved cases in the region, searching for patterns, similar victim profiles, or geographic links. The prospect of a serial killer struck fear into the heart of the community, raising the possibility that there were other victims out there, lost and waiting for justice. This theory gained particular weight when Robert Craig Cox, the earlier suspect, was implicated in other violent crimes. Investigators began to explore whether Cox or someone with similar tendencies might have operated in a much broader territory, taking lives and eluding capture across state lines. While no direct link to other cases could be confirmed, the serial killer theory became a chilling possibility, one that would forever color the narrative of the Springfield Three. Even as investigators considered outside suspects, some theories took a more inward turn, questioning whether someone close to Cheryl, Susie, or Stacy could have been involved. It was not unheard of for family members, friends, or even partners to be complicit in disappearances. In some cases, tensions or conflicts can escalate into violence, and authorities have often looked closely at those nearest the victims. However, in the case of the Springfield Three, there was no evidence of discord that would suggest an internal betrayal. Despite the numerous suspects and theories, the case of the Springfield Three remains an unsolved enigma. Each suspect, each theory, offers a tantalizing hint but ultimately falls short of providing closure. Somewhere, someone knows the truth of what happened that fateful night. The theories surrounding the Springfield Three haunt the people of Missouri, a reminder of the darkness that can hide in plain sight, waiting to reveal itself in ways no one can predict. As the weeks after the disappearance of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall turned into months and then years, the legal proceedings in the case became a painful symbol of the justice that seemed just out of reach. In a situation with no bodies, no suspects with confirmed involvement, and no concrete evidence, the judicial system found itself paralyzed, despite the tireless efforts of the investigators, district attorneys, and the desperate families of the missing women. It was a haunting absence, a case that should have had its day in court but remained stubbornly in the shadows, with its grim secrets still locked away. Without a suspect formally charged, the case existed in a legal limbo. Yet there were several times over the years when it seemed the case might inch closer to a courtroom. Each time, however, the promise of justice slipped through their fingers like smoke. One could sense the tension rising whenever there was a breakthrough, no matter how small, and then the heartbreaking fall when the lead evaporated into nothingness. In the absence of a suspect or concrete physical evidence linking anyone definitively to the disappearance, the legal authorities found themselves in a quagmire. The process of building a case without clear forensic links or a confession was like trying to build a house on quicksand. For prosecutors, every step forward seemed to be met with an equal, if not stronger, setback. Over the years, the investigation amassed a substantial amount of circumstantial evidence, hearsay, and witness accounts. There were countless witness statements, tips that poured in by the thousands, and testimonies from people who believed they had seen or heard something that night or in the days that followed. But in a courtroom, circumstantial evidence and speculative theories often lack the weight needed to convict a person beyond a reasonable doubt. The district attorney and legal team understood that in order to stand a chance, they needed irrefutable evidence, a smoking gun or a confession. And for the Springfield Three, neither materialized. Over the years, the case was presented multiple times to grand juries, each time with an air of cautious optimism. Legal teams would go over the evidence meticulously, preparing presentations and constructing hypothetical scenarios. They hoped to secure an indictment that would finally push the case to trial, where witnesses could testify and the families of the victims could have their day in court. But the grand juries, tasked with deciding if there was enough evidence for an indictment, repeatedly declined to bring charges against any particular suspect. Without bodies, forensic evidence, or an eyewitness, they could not, in good conscience, recommend going to trial on what amounted to speculation and hearsay. Each grand jury rejection felt like another nail in the coffin of justice for the Springfield Three, leaving their families heartbroken and the investigators grappling with feelings of helplessness. The legal system's hands were tied by the very rules designed to protect the innocent, and without the necessary proof, there was simply no way forward. As time wore on, the case transitioned to cold case status. This designation was a bitter pill for the family's friends and the community. Cold case status meant that active investigations slowed, resources became harder to secure, and the focus shifted to new cases. For the families, it felt as though the legal system had abandoned their loved ones, consigning them to the annals of unsolved mysteries. Despite the case going cold, there were periodic attempts to reopen it, especially when new tips surfaced or when advancements in technology offered a fresh perspective. DNA testing, for instance, became more sophisticated in the years following the disappearance. Items from the house were tested and retested, yet no match could be found. The legal teams pushed for funding to continue these tests, hoping to find some microscopic clue that might have been overlooked in the initial investigation. With each push for renewed investigation, the case inched closer to trial, if only in the hopes of those who remained invested. Every so often, a new investigator would pick up the case file, believing they might find the missing puzzle piece. Yet each time, the conclusion was the same. Without more concrete evidence, the Springfield Three would remain beyond the reach of justice. In the absence of a criminal trial, the families turned to civil court, hoping that perhaps a different legal pathway could provide some form of closure. Civil suits have a lower burden of proof than criminal cases, relying on a preponderance of the evidence rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. However, without a defendant to hold accountable, even this avenue proved challenging. Stacy McCall's family in particular pursued various legal avenues, filing suits to access more information or compel further investigation. These suits served as a symbolic stand, a message that they would not rest until they had answers. In each attempt, however, they faced the same barriers: without suspects, without evidence. There was no legal proceeding that could bring closure to the haunting questions surrounding the case. The families were left in a heartbreaking limbo. They had no bodies to bury, no convictions to assure them that justice had been served, and no sense of resolution to ease their pain. Civil proceedings brought them moments of recognition and raised awareness of the case, but they could never fill the void left by the absence of a criminal trial. Though there was no formal trial, the case of the Springfield Three played out in the court of public opinion, fueled by media coverage that both enlightened and frustrated those seeking answers. News outlets across Missouri and nationwide followed every twist and turn, with the story gaining momentum each time a new suspect or theory emerged. Reporters flocked to Springfield, shining a spotlight on the case and putting pressure on law enforcement and legal teams to deliver results. Over time, the case took on a near-mythic status, a ghost story that haunted Missouri and the entire country. Documentaries, news specials, and even podcasts picked up the story, dissecting every available detail and positing new theories. Some journalists became obsessed with the case, sifting through files and interviewing anyone with a shred of insight. But for all the media coverage and public scrutiny, nothing could replace the trial that never happened. The families watched as the media painted pictures of their loved ones, sometimes accurately, sometimes sensationalized. Public pressure mounted, and in some ways, the relentless attention served as an informal form of justice, keeping the case in the spotlight and preventing it from fading into obscurity. Yet, for all the headlines and broadcasts, the fact remained: there was no trial, no defendant, no chance to lay the tragedy of the Springfield Three to rest. Today, more than 3 decades after the women vanished, the case is still discussed, still mourned, still investigated. It is a story that remains raw and real, even as the town of Springfield has changed and grown. New generations hear the story and feel its impact, knowing that what happened to Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy is a part of their town's history, an unresolved wound that has yet to heal. The Springfield Three have not been forgotten. Their names remain etched into the collective memory of the town and are mentioned in discussions about unsolved cases and community safety. In a strange way, the mystery surrounding their disappearance has inspired hope among other families who have lost loved ones, showing them that there are people who will continue to fight for justice, no matter how long it takes. Their case remains open, a testament to the unbreakable bonds of family, the persistence of a community, and the undying hope that one day, someone will come forward with the answers that have evaded Springfield for so long. The story of the Springfield Three remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history, casting a dark shadow over the town of Springfield, Missouri. Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, and Stacy McCall should have had the chance to live out the ordinary dreams of life, family, career, laughter, and love. Instead, they became symbols of a mystery that has captivated, haunted, and unsettled everyone who's heard their story. For over 30 years, the unanswered questions continue to echo, creating a sense of unresolved suspense that feels as piercing as it did in 1992. Where did the women go that night? Who could have orchestrated such a meticulous disappearance without leaving a trace? Janice McCall's voice has never stopped calling for answers, her determination as fierce as it was the day she realized her daughter was missing. Her mission to find Stacy and to learn what happened to Susie and Cheryl has been a beacon, a reminder of the strength and resilience that exist even in the face of unimaginable grief. In the end, the legacy of the Springfield Three endures both as a heartbreaking mystery and as a warning. The case has highlighted the fragility of safety and the ease with which it can shatter, leaving a community forever changed. The story has fueled countless investigations, theories, and hopes, ensuring that what happened to these 3 women will never be forgotten, never fade into the background. As we close this chapter, one thing remains clear: the story of the Springfield Three is not over. Somewhere out there, someone knows the truth. The answers are hidden, but they are not gone. Someday, perhaps the final piece of the puzzle will fall into place, and the shadows will give way to light. Until that day comes, the story of the Springfield Three, a chilling reminder of the unknown and the enduring hope that one day, justice will finally prevail.